The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the apartment door like a ghost from a past Claire Hendricks had spent 3 years trying to forget. She almost stepped on it, rushing out with her daughter Maya's lunch bag in one hand and her phone in the other, already late for the 7:15 shift at Sacred Heart Hospital, where she worked as a medical records clerk. Maya saw it first. The 9-year-old's sharp eyes caught the cream-colored paper, expensive looking against the worn hallway carpet of their studio apartment in Chicago's South Side. "Mom, there's a letter." Claire backtracked, scooped it up without looking, and shoved it into her purse. No time. Mrs. Patterson, her supervisor, had already written her up twice for tardiness, and one more infraction meant termination. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with Maya's asthma medication running $200 a month even with insurance, not with rent due in 8 days and her checking account showing a balance that made her stomach clench every time she checked it. The letter stayed in her purse through her entire shift, through the monotonous scanning of patient files, through her 15-minute lunch break eaten standing up in the break room, through the afternoon slump when her lower back screamed from hours at the standing desk the hospital had installed to promote employee wellness while simultaneously cutting healthcare benefits. It wasn't until she picked Maya up from the after-school program at 5:30, rode the bus home through rush hour traffic that added 40 minutes to a 20-minute trip, and finally collapsed onto their pull-out couch that doubled as her bed, that she remembered the envelope. The return address made her breath catch. Kellerman, Price & Associates, attorneys at law, Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Her hand started shaking before she even opened it. Millbrook, the town she'd fled 3 years ago after her uncle's funeral turned into a battlefield. The place where her siblings had made it crystal clear that she was the outsider, the disappointment, the one who didn't belong. Maya climbed onto the couch beside her, homework forgotten, sensing something important in her mother's sudden stillness. "What is it?" Claire tore the envelope open, her fingers clumsy with something that felt like dread mixed with exhausted curiosity. "Dear Ms. Hendricks, this letter serves as formal notification that you have been named as a beneficiary in the estate of Vernon Augustus Hendricks, your late uncle, who passed away on March 3rd, 2024. The estate has now cleared probate. Per Mr. Hendricks' explicit instructions documented in his last will and testament dated January 15th, 2024, you are entitled to claim the contents of his personal workshop and storage facility located at 847 Industrial Drive, Millbrook, Pennsylvania, your siblings, Richard Hendricks, Patricia Hendricks Monroe, and Daniel Hendricks, have been notified of this bequest. The property has been secured and awaits your inspection. Please contact our office within 30 days to arrange transfer of the property contents. Failure to claim within this time frame will result in the items being sold at public auction, with proceeds distributed according to the residuary clause of Mr. Hendricks' will. Enclosed, please find documentation of the bequest and contact information for the property manager. Sincerely, Thomas Kellerman. Claire read it 3 times. Her mind tried to process what this meant. Uncle Vernon's workshop, the place he'd spent every waking hour when he wasn't at the steel mill, tinkering with old machinery, collecting tools and equipment that he'd restore with patient hands and an engineer's precision. She remembered visiting once as a child, maybe 8 years old, before her mother died and everything fractured. Vernon had shown her a massive safe in the corner, rust-covered and ancient, with a combination lock that looked like something from a Western movie. He'd winked at her and said, "Someday this old thing might surprise everyone, little bird. Someday." But that was 25 years ago. Vernon had been 50 then, strong and vital. At his funeral 3 years ago, he'd been 75, shrunken by cancer, barely recognizable as the man who'd once lifted her onto his shoulders at family picnics. The funeral had been a nightmare Claire still had trouble thinking about without her chest tightening. Her siblings circling like sharks, Richard with his expensive suit and lawyer on speed dial, Patricia with her fake concern masking cold calculation, Daniel playing peacemaker while privately scheming with the other 2. They'd expected Vernon to leave them his house, his savings, everything. The will reading had been brutal. Vernon had left the house to Richard as the oldest, his car and personal effects to Patricia, his tools to Daniel, and to Claire, the black sheep who'd moved to Chicago to escape them all. He'd left the workshop and all contents thereof. Richard had laughed, actually laughed, standing right there in the lawyer's office. The workshop? Claire gets the workshop? That's perfect. She can have his junk. Rusty old machines and broken equipment. Maybe she can sell it for scrap and buy herself something nice. God knows she needs it. Patricia had been less openly cruel, but more cutting. Vernon always did have a soft spot for strays. Claire, honey, if you need help sorting through it all, I'm sure we can arrange something. We wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed. Claire had walked out without saying a word, caught the first bus back to Chicago, and hadn't spoken to any of them since. She'd been homeless then, Maya only 6 years old, bouncing between shelters and the homes of friends who could only host them temporarily. The workshop had seemed like one more burden, one more responsibility she couldn't handle. So she let sit, let the 30-day window pass, let the lawyers send follow-up letters that she'd ignored because opening them meant acknowledging a past she was desperate to escape. But apparently, Vernon's will had included provisions that prevented immediate auction. Some kind of extended holding period that Claire hadn't understood at the time and was only now beginning to grasp. 3 years. The workshop had sat untouched for 3 years. Maya's small hand found Claire's. Mom, what does it say? Claire looked down at her daughter, 9 years old now, with dark eyes that saw too much and a quiet strength that broke Claire's heart regularly. Maya, who'd never complained about sharing a studio apartment, who'd learned to do homework in hospital waiting rooms and bus stops, who'd helped her mother count change for groceries without ever asking why they couldn't just use a credit card like other kids' parents. My Uncle Vernon died 3 years ago. You remember, baby? We went to his funeral? Maya nodded slowly. The one where your brother yelled at you in the parking lot. Claire winced. She'd hoped Maya didn't. Remember that part. Richard screaming that she was pathetic, that she'd failed at everything, that even their mother would be ashamed of what Claire had become. Patricia pulling him away with false apologies. Daniel watching with those calculating eyes, already figuring out how to use the situation to his advantage. Yeah, that one. Well, Uncle Vernon left me something. His workshop. And apparently I can finally claim it. What's in it? I don't know, sweetheart. Tools, probably. Old equipment. Uncle Vernon was a machinist. He collected things, restored them. Your great-grandfather was an engineer, and Vernon inherited that love of how things work. Maya studied the letter with the serious expression she got when trying to understand adult complications. Is it worth money? The question stabbed at Claire. 9 years old and already thinking about money because she'd watched her mother stress about it her entire life. Probably not much, baby, but maybe we can sell some things. Every little bit helps, right? That night, after Maya fell asleep in the Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, Claire pulled out her laptop and started researching. The workshop was in Millbrook's old industrial district, near the abandoned steel mill that had once employed half the town before closing in 2008. According to Google Maps, the building looked like every other corrugated metal structure in that part of town. Utilitarian, weathered, anonymous. She found the property manager's contact information and sent a careful email. Professional, brief, requesting access to inspect the property and begin inventory. She didn't mention that she'd have to take unpaid time off work to drive the 8 hours to Pennsylvania. Didn't mention that her car was held together by prayer and stubbornness, burning oil and making concerning noises that she couldn't afford to have diagnosed. Didn't mention that her siblings would probably find out the moment she showed up and make her life hell. The response came 12 hours later, formal and efficient. The property manager could meet her any weekday between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. The building was secure, climate-controlled. Utilities paid through an account Vernon had established before his death. Everything waiting exactly as he'd left it. Claire stared at those words. Asterisk climate-controlled. Utilities paid. Asterisk Vernon had planned for this. Had made sure the workshop would be preserved even if she didn't claim it immediately. Had known, somehow, that she'd need time. She requested Friday off from work, citing a family emergency. Mrs. Patterson's expression made it clear what she thought about that excuse, but legally she couldn't refuse. Claire would lose a day's pay, but there was no way around it. Thursday night, she packed a small bag for herself and Maya. Minimal clothes, snacks for the drive, Maya's inhaler and medication, just in case. The car would barely fit both of them, plus whatever she might be able to salvage from the workshop. She was already mentally calculating resale values, trying to figure out what kind of tools or equipment might actually be worth the gas money to transport back to Chicago. They left at 4 a.m. Friday morning. Maya, still half asleep in the passenger seat, clutching the stuffed elephant that had survived 3 years of instability and countless moves. Claire navigated out of Chicago in pre-dawn darkness, the city's lights giving way to highway stretches that felt endless and hypnotic. Maya woke up somewhere in Indiana, blinking at flat farmland rolling past the windows. How long until we get there? About 4 more hours, baby. Will we see your brother and sister? Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't think so. They don't know I'm coming. And they don't care about Uncle Vernon's workshop anyway. They made that pretty clear. But she was lying, and some part of her knew it. If her siblings had been notified of the bequest, if they'd received the same letter from the lawyers, they'd be watching, waiting to see if she'd actually show up, if she'd try to claim what Vernon had left her. They stopped for breakfast at a truck stop in Ohio. Pancakes for Maya, coffee and toast for Claire because that's all she could afford while still having enough for gas to get home. Maya ate slowly, studying her mother's face with that too perceptive gaze that sometimes felt like being examined under a microscope. Are you scared? The question caught Claire off guard. She almost denied it automatically, the way parents do when trying to protect their children from adult anxieties. But Maya deserved honesty, had earned it through 3 years of being far braver than any 9-year-old should have to be. A little bit, yeah. Uncle Vernon was kind to me when I was your age. But my siblings, they weren't. And I haven't seen them in 3 years. I don't know what they'll say if they find out I'm here. Will they be mean? Probably. They usually are. Maya nodded, processing this. But we're going anyway. Yeah, baby. We're going anyway. Because Uncle Vernon left this to me, not them. And because sometimes you have to do hard things even when you're scared. They reached Millbrook just after noon, the town exactly as Claire remembered it. Population 8,500, half what it had been before the mill closed. Main Street lined with more empty storefronts than occupied ones. The good restaurants replaced by dollar stores and payday loan offices. The kind of slow economic death that had consumed hundreds of Rust Belt towns, leaving behind populations that couldn't afford to leave and couldn't figure out how to rebuild. Claire drove past her old high school, past the park where she'd spent summers as a kid, past the house where she'd grown up with her mother and siblings before everything fell apart. She didn't slow down, didn't let herself look too closely at the peeling paint and overgrown yard. Some memories were better left alone. The industrial district sat on the east side of town, a maze of metal buildings and cracked asphalt lots. Most were abandoned now, windows broken, doors hanging off hinges. But 847 Industrial Drive looked different. The building was intact, well-maintained, with a heavy padlock on the roll-up door and security cameras mounted at the corners. Vernon had protected this place, even after death. The realization made Claire's throat tight. The property manager pulled up in a pickup truck exactly at 1 p.m. Robert Hayes, 60-something, with a weathered face and careful eyes that assessed Claire and Maya before he said a word. Ms. Hendricks, that's me. This is my daughter, Maya. He nodded to them both, then pulled out a massive ring of keys. Vernon hired me about 6 months before he passed, paid me a year in advance, then set up an account to keep paying even after he was gone. Made me promise to keep this place secure and maintained until you claimed it. Claire felt something crack in her chest. He knew I'd come. He hoped you would. Said you'd need time, that you'd been through things that would make claiming it complicated. He was a patient man, your uncle. Understood that some gifts take a while to accept. Robert unlocked the padlock, then bent to unlock 2 more locks Claire hadn't noticed at the base of the roll-up door. Security layered like Vernon had been protecting something valuable, which seemed absurd for a workshop full of old tools. The door rolled up with a metallic screech that echoed across the empty lot. Inside was darkness, and then Robert hit the lights. Claire stopped breathing. The workshop was enormous, easily 5,000 square feet, with 20-foot ceilings and industrial lighting that illuminated every corner. But what stopped her breath wasn't the size, it was the organization. Every wall lined with pegboards displaying tools arranged with museum-quality precision. Workbenches clean and orderly, each surface holding equipment that gleamed despite decades of age. Machines she couldn't identify, standing like soldiers at attention, their metal surfaces oiled and maintained. This wasn't junk. This wasn't scrap metal waiting for auction. This was a collection. A carefully curated, meticulously maintained collection that represented decades of work. Maya walked in slowly, her eyes wide, reaching out to touch a wall of antique measuring tools before remembering to ask, "Can I?" Robert smiled. Vernon would have wanted you to touch things. He believed tools were meant to be used, not just looked at. Claire moved deeper into the workshop, her mind trying to process the sheer volume of items. Industrial lathes from the early 1900s. Milling machines that looked like they belonged in the Smithsonian. Hand tools with wooden handles worn smooth by generations of use. Equipment she recognized from her engineering classes in the 2 years of community college she'd managed before dropping out to work full-time. And in the far corner, exactly where she remembered it from childhood, sat the safe. It was bigger than she'd remembered, maybe 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, made of cast iron gone rust-red with age. The combination dial looked like it had been forged rather than machined, with numbers barely visible beneath layers of oxidation. Someone had tried to paint over the rust at some point, but the paint had flaked away, leaving the safe looking ancient and impenetrable. Robert followed her gaze. Vernon never opened that thing in the whole time I knew him. Said he'd lost the combination years ago, that it probably didn't matter anyway, since whatever was inside had likely rusted into nothing. Claire approached it slowly, running her hand over the rough surface. The metal was cold beneath her fingers, solid and immovable. She tried the handle experimentally, but it didn't budge. Locked, just like it had been 25 years ago, when Vernon had winked at her and talked about surprises. "What do you think is inside?" Maya asked, pressing close to her mother's side. "Probably nothing, baby. Uncle Vernon used to joke about it, but I think it was just an old safe he'd salvaged from somewhere. A conversation piece." But even as she said it, Claire remembered the way Vernon had looked at this safe, not with frustration or dismissal, but with something that might have been satisfaction, like he knew something no one else did. Robert checked his watch. "I've got another appointment at 3 o'clock, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need. The building is yours now, contents and all." Vernon's was clear about that. "What about my siblings? Richard and Patricia and Daniel?" Something flickered across Robert's face. "They've been by 3 times in the past year, actually tried to convince me to let them in. Said they were worried about the contents deteriorating, that they were Claire's legal representatives, that the will had been challenged. I called the lawyers each time. Mr. Kellerman confirmed the will stands, that only you have access, and that your siblings have no legal claim to anything in this building." Claire felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "They're going to show up, aren't they? Now that I'm here." "Probably." Millbrook's small. Word travels fast. He handed her a key ring with 3 keys. "Building, office, and bathroom. Everything else is yours to figure out." Vernon left files in the office, inventory lists, purchase records, restoration logs. He documented everything. After Robert left, Claire and Maya spent an hour exploring, both of them overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what Vernon had accumulated. The office turned out to be a small room built into the corner of the workshop, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk that held a computer from the early 2000s. The filing cabinets were organized by category: lathes, mills, hand tools, measuring equipment. Each file contained photographs, purchase receipts, restoration notes written in Vernon's precise handwriting, and something that made Claire's breath catch: estimated values. She pulled the first file at random. A hard-inch HLVH lathe, purchased in 1987 for $2,500. Restored over 3 years. Current estimated value as of January 2024, $18,000. The next file, a Brown and Sharp universal milling machine, acquired in 1993 for $800. Fully restored. Current estimated value, $12,500. File after file, each one documenting tools and equipment that Vernon had bought for hundreds and restored to values in the thousands. The numbers started to blur together. 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. Maya pulled out a different drawer, this one labeled specialty items. The files here were thicker, containing more detailed documentation. A complete set of machinist tools from the 1940s, originally owned by a master craftsman named Heinrich Müller. Purchase price, $3,000. Current estimated value, $45,000. Claire sat down heavily in Vernon's desk chair, the numbers swirling in her head. She'd expected junk. She'd expected to maybe salvage a few $100s worth of tools to sell on Craigslist. She hadn't expected this, a systematic collection that had to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. Mom? Maya's voice pulled her back to the present. There's more drawers. A lot more. The filing cabinet had 8 drawers. They'd only looked at 2. Claire stood on shaking legs and started pulling files systematically. Precision instruments, antique metalworking equipment, industrial artifacts from the early days of American manufacturing. Each one documented with the care of a museum curator. Each one representing Vernon's patient work restoring forgotten tools to working condition. The last drawer held a file labeled simply Insurance Appraisal, January 2024. Claire's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a professional appraisal conducted by Weston and Associates, industrial equipment specialists, dated 3 weeks before Vernon's death. The letter on top summarized their findings. Mr. Hendricks, asterisk per your request, we have completed a comprehensive appraisal of the equipment and tools housed at 847 Industrial Drive. Our team spent 4 days cataloging and assessing each item based on condition, rarity, historical significance, and current market value. Asterisk total appraised value of collection, $847,000 asterisk. This figure is conservative and reflects immediate liquidation value. At auction, particularly if marketed to collectors and museums, the collection could potentially exceed $1. $2 million. Asterisk asterisk, we strongly recommend proper insurance coverage and continued climate control to preserve the collection's value. Asterisk. Claire read the number 3 times before it registered. $847,000. Uncle Vernon's junk workshop. The thing Richard had laughed about. The consolation prize for the family failure. Worth nearly $1 million. Maya leaned against her mother's side, reading over her shoulder, even though she probably couldn't process what the numbers meant. Is that good, Mom? Claire's laugh came out shaky, borderline hysterical. Yeah, baby. That's really good. She sat back down, trying to understand what this meant. The equipment alone could pay off her medical debt, Maya's ongoing medication costs, maybe even get them into a real apartment with a bedroom for Maya. Security for the first time in 3 years. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, reality crashed down. Her siblings had been trying to access this building for a year. They'd lied to Robert, claiming legal authority they didn't have. And if they found out what was really in here, if they learned the actual value of Vernon's collection, they would come at her with everything they had. She needed to document everything, needed to get proper legal protection before word spread. Needed to move faster than Richard's lawyers, think more strategically than Patricia's cold calculations, anticipate Daniel's schemes before they materialized. Claire pulled out her phone and started photographing the appraisal, then methodically worked her way through the files, capturing images of Vernon's documentation. Each file represented hours of his work, years of patient restoration, a legacy he'd built piece by piece in this industrial workshop while the rest of the family dismissed him as eccentric. She was so focused on photographing files that she didn't hear the door open, didn't hear footsteps crossing the concrete floor, didn't realize they were no longer alone until Richard's voice cut through the workshop like a blade. Well, the prodigal sister returns. Claire spun around, her phone clutched in her hand, adrenaline spiking so hard her vision tunneled. Richard stood 20 feet away, expensive suit incongruous in the industrial space, his expression carrying the same contempt it had held at Vernon's funeral. Patricia stood beside him, her smile sharp and calculated. And Daniel brought up the rear, hands in his pockets, face carefully neutral, the three of them blocking the only exit. Maya pressed against Claire's side, small and frightened, and Claire felt something fierce rise up in her chest. Protective, uncompromising. You need to leave. This is my property. Richard's laugh was cold. Your property? Claire, be serious. Vernon left you a workshop full of junk because he felt sorry for you. We're here to help you understand what you're actually looking at. Patricia's voice came softer, more dangerous in its false kindness. Honey, we know you've been struggling, living in that awful studio apartment in Chicago, barely making ends meet. We're not here to fight. We're here to make you an offer. Claire's hand tightened on her phone, Vernon's appraisal still displayed on the screen. I'm not interested in any offers. Don't be stupid. Richard stepped closer, and Claire instinctively moved to keep herself between him and Maya. You can't possibly manage this collection. You don't have the expertise, the connections, or the capital to liquidate it properly. We're offering to handle everything. We'll sell it all, split the proceeds fairly, and you'll walk away with enough money to get your life together. Split it fairly? Like you split Dad's insurance money? The words came out before Claire could stop them, and she watched Richard's face flush with anger. We've been over this. Those were loans. Not our fault you couldn't manage your finances. They were theft. You took $80,000 from a grieving daughter who trusted you, and you disappeared. Daniel finally spoke, his voice carrying the reasonable tone that had always made him the most dangerous. Claire, let's not rehash old arguments. The past is the past. What matters now is this collection, which Vernon left to you because he didn't want you to have nothing. But he didn't expect you to actually manage it alone. That's why we're here, to help. Vernon left it to me because he trusted me, not you. Patricia's false sympathy cracked. Vernon was dying and sentimental. He wasn't thinking clearly. You're a single mother working a minimum wage job. You live in a studio apartment and drive a car that's one breakdown from the junkyard. You are not equipped to handle an estate like this. Get out. Richard's expression went cold. We're trying to do this nicely, Claire, but if you won't be reasonable, we have other options. Our lawyers are already preparing a petition to challenge Vernon's will on the grounds of undue influence and your demonstrated inability to manage his estate. You can't do that. The will has been through probate. We can reopen it, especially when we demonstrate that Vernon's bequest to you was part of a larger pattern of mental decline, that he wasn't competent when he made these decisions, that someone needs to be appointed to manage this collection properly before you run into the ground. Claire felt the walls closing in, felt the familiar weight of her sibling's certainty that she was incompetent, irresponsible, incapable of anything except failure. Felt Maya trembling against her side, her daughter absorbing this vicious display of family cruelty. But she also felt Vernon's patient work surrounding her, felt the weight of his gift, deliberately given to her and not them, felt the appraisal in her hand documenting exactly what this collection represented. Vernon didn't leave this to me because he felt sorry for me, Claire heard herself say, voice steady despite her hammering heart. He left it to me because he knew what you were. He watched you steal from me for years, watched you manipulate and scheme and take. He knew that if he left you anything valuable, you'd destroy it, sell it off piece by piece without ever understanding what it represented. Richard's face went purple. You ungrateful. This collection is worth $847,000. Claire held up her phone, showing him the appraisal. Potentially over $1 million at auction. Every single item documented and insured. And Vernon left it to me, specifically excluding all of you. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire watched the information process across her. Siblings' faces. Shock. Calculation. Greed crystallizing into determined action. Patricia recovered first, her voice going silky smooth. Then you definitely need professional management. Claire, honey, $1 million? You can't handle that kind of money. Look what happened last time. Last time you stole it. We helped you invest it, and you made bad decisions. You forged my signature on loan documents and emptied my accounts. The accusations hung in the air between them. 3 years of suppressed rage, of sleeping in cars and choosing between Maya's medication and groceries, of the systematic destruction of trust that family was supposed to provide. Richard pulled out his phone. I'm calling our lawyer right now. We're filing an emergency petition to freeze this estate until competency can be established. You're not touching a single item until a court reviews Vernon's mental state and your fitness to inherit. Claire felt something inside her shift. A decision crystallizing from desperation and fury and the memory of Vernon winking at her in this very workshop, promising that someday everyone would be surprised. Call whoever you want. Vernon's will is solid. 3 different lawyers reviewed it. The collection is mine, legally and completely. And you're trespassing on my property. She pulled out her own phone and dialed 911. Richard actually laughed. You're calling the police? On your own family? On 3 people who are trespassing and threatening me. Claire spoke clearly into the phone when the dispatcher answered. Yes, I need an officer at 847 Industrial Drive. 3 individuals are on my property without permission and refusing to leave. Patricia's expression went cold. You're going to regret this, Claire. We're not going away. We'll fight you in court, in public, everywhere it matters. By the time we're done, you'll wish you'd taken our reasonable offer. Get out of my workshop. They left, but the threats in Richard's parting look promised this was just beginning. Claire stood trembling in the middle of Vernon's collection. Maya pressed against her side and tried to process what had just happened. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, challenged her siblings' assumption that she'd fold, that she'd give in, that she was too weak to fight. And now they would come at her with everything they had, lawyers and public opinion, and the systematic cruelty they'd perfected over years of making her feel worthless. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Sarah Chun took Claire's statement, documented the confrontation, and provided information about filing a formal trespass warning. She was professional and kind, and she didn't make Claire feel stupid for calling about family members. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Officer Chun asked, glancing at Maya, who'd been silent through the whole exchange. If they know you're here alone. We were just leaving, driving back to Chicago. But even as Claire said it, exhaustion crashed over her. 8 hours driving here, emotional confrontation with her siblings, the overwhelming revelation of the collection's value. She couldn't drive 8 hours back tonight. Not safely, not with Maya. There's a Hampton Inn just off the highway, Officer Chin said gently. Clean, safe, reasonable rates. I'd recommend staying there rather than trying to drive when you're this tired. After the officer left, Claire locked the workshop carefully, triple-checking each lock. She and Maya drove to the Hampton Inn in silence, both of them processing what had happened. Claire counted the cash in her wallet, $83, and prayed the hotel rate wouldn't exceed what her nearly max credit card could handle. The room cost $89 plus tax. Claire handed over her card and pretended not to see the desk clerk's expression when the transaction took 3 tries to process. Upstairs, Maya collapsed onto one of the double beds without even changing clothes. Claire sat beside her, running gentle fingers through her daughter's hair, trying to find words that would explain what had just happened without terrifying her 9-year-old. Are they going to take it? Maya's voice was small, muffled against the pillow. Uncle Vernon's workshop. They're going to try, baby, but I'm not going to let them. How? They're mean and scary, and they have lawyers. Claire didn't have a good answer for that. Didn't know how to explain that she was terrified too, that the numbers in Vernon's appraisal felt both like salvation and impossible fantasy, that her siblings had destroyed her before and could probably do it again. But she thought about Vernon, spending decades building this collection in patient solitude. Thought about him choosing her specifically, knowing her siblings would dismiss her, knowing she'd need time to be strong enough to claim it. He believed in her when no one else did. had seen something worth protecting beneath the poverty and struggle. "I'm going to fight," Claire told her daughter, "because Uncle Vernon trusted me with this, and because sometimes the people who seem weak are actually stronger than anyone realizes." Maya rolled over, dark eyes serious in the lamplight. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom." Claire pulled her daughter close and let herself cry for the first time in months. Quiet tears that Maya pretended not to notice. Both of them holding each other in a cheap hotel room 8 hours from home. Both of them aware that everything had just changed and nothing would be easy. But tomorrow, Claire would call lawyers, would start building her defense before Richard could mobilize his attack, would begin the process of cataloging and protecting Vernon's legacy from people who saw dollar signs instead of artistry. Tonight, though, she let herself be scared. Let herself acknowledge the enormity of what she'd inherited and the battle that was coming. And in the morning, she'd be strong again. Claire woke at 5:47 a.m. to her phone buzzing with text messages. 7 of them, all from numbers she didn't recognize, all variations of the same message. Reporters asking for comment about the Hendricks family estate dispute. Her stomach dropped. Richard had moved faster than she'd anticipated. She scrolled through her email while Maya slept, finding 3 messages from addresses she did recognize. Richard's lawyer, copying her on a petition filed in Jefferson County Court at 8:30 p.m. yesterday. Somehow they found a judge willing to accept emergency filings after hours. The petition requested immediate appointment of a neutral executor to protect the estate from dissipation by an incompetent heir. Patricia had sent an email at 11 p.m. with the subject line, "Please reconsider." The body was 2 paragraphs of concerned trolling about Claire's welfare and Maya's stability, concluding with an offer to handle everything for a mere 60% management fee. Daniel's message was shorter, arriving at 1:03 a.m. "You don't understand what you're doing. Call me before this gets ugly." Claire set the phone down, carefully fighting the urge to throw it across the room. They'd spent the night mobilizing, filing legal motions, contacting press, building their campaign while she'd been sleeping in a budget hotel. She was already 3 steps behind, outmaneuvered before the real battle had even started. Maya stirred, blinking awake in the unfamiliar room. "Mom, right here, baby. Everything's okay." The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. They used the hotel's continental breakfast, Claire forcing herself to eat while mentally calculating costs. The drive back to Chicago would take most of her remaining cash. She'd have to call in sick Monday, another unpaid day, to deal with whatever legal fires Richard was setting. Mrs. Patterson would not be understanding. Her phone rang as they were loading the car. Unknown Pennsylvania number. Claire almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Hendricks? This is Thomas Kellerman. I represent Vernon Hendricks' estate." The lawyer from the letter. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes. I've been copied on a petition filed by your siblings last night. I wanted to reach out before you hear about it from less friendly sources." His voice carried professional concern. "They're claiming undue influence and requesting emergency relief. It's aggressive. Can they actually freeze the estate? Vernon's will already went through probate." "They could try." Judge Morrison granted a temporary restraining order preventing you from removing or selling any items from the workshop until a hearing can be scheduled. First available date is Tuesday. Claire's vision tunneled. "I can't stay in Pennsylvania until Tuesday. I have a job in Chicago. I have my daughter to care for." "I understand. But if you leave, they'll use it as evidence that you're not serious about managing the estate, that you're planning to abandon it or sell everything quickly without proper consideration. Ms. Hendricks, I'm going to be frank with you. Your siblings have hired Bennett and Cross. They're the most aggressive probate litigation firm in the state. They're very good at making people look incompetent." Claire closed her eyes, leaning against the car. Maya watched from the passenger seat, too perceptive not to know something was wrong. "What do I do?" Kellerman paused. "You need representation. Good representation. I can recommend someone, but I'll warn you now, this is going to get expensive. Bennett and Cross will drag this out, file motion after motion, bleed you dry with legal fees if they can. They're betting you can't afford to fight long term." "How much are we talking?" 15 to 20,000 just to get through preliminary hearings. More if it goes to trial. The number hit Claire like a fist. She had $340 in her checking account. Her credit cards were maxed. She couldn't even afford a consultation fee, let alone months of litigation. I don't have that kind of money. I know. That's what your siblings are counting on. Kellerman's voice softened slightly. Vernon knew this might happen. He left a letter with me, to be opened if his bequest to you is challenged. Do you want me to read it? Yes. Claire's voice cracked. She heard paper rustling. Then Kellerman's voice reading Vernon's careful handwriting. Claire, if you're hearing this, Richard and Patricia and Daniel have shown their true colors. They've decided that my collection should be theirs because they deserve it and you don't. They're wrong. I watched you grow up in a family that never appreciated you. Watched you care for your mother when she was dying while your siblings were too busy to visit. Watched you choose nursing school to help people. Watched you give up everything to raise Maya alone when her father abandoned you both. Your siblings take. You give. That's why I left you this collection. But I also know they'll fight you. They've never understood the value of patience or craftsmanship. They'll see dollar signs and want immediate gratification. They won't understand that this collection represents 50 years of patient work, of finding beauty in forgotten tools, of preserving history that others dismissed as junk. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them convince you that you're not capable. You are more capable than they will ever be, specifically because you understand that value isn't just measured in money. There's something else in the workshop I never told anyone about. Something even my insurance appraisers didn't know. The safe in the corner, the one I always said I'd lost the combination to, I never lost it. I just never opened it. The combination is your mother's birthday, July 13th, 1959. What's inside will change everything. But you have to be the one to open it, Claire. No one else. Don't tell your siblings. Don't mention it to lawyers. Open it alone, document everything, and then decide what to do with what you find. I trust you. I always have. Uncle Vernon. Claire's hand was shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone. The safe. Vernon had known all along what was inside. Had left her the combination, but only through a letter that would only be read if her siblings challenged the will. He planned for this. All of it. Ms. Hendricks. Kellerman's voice pulled her back. Are you still there? The letter mentioned something in a safe. Did he leave any other documentation about that? No, just the letter. Is there actually a safe in the workshop? Claire made a split-second decision. Vernon's warning echoed in her mind. Don't mention it to lawyers. I'm not sure. I'd have to check. Mr. Kellerman, what happens if I can't afford representation? Then your siblings will probably win. Not because they have legal standing, they don't, but because they can afford to make this process so expensive and painful that you give up. It's a war of attrition, and they have deeper pockets. After ending the call, Claire sat in the car for 5 minutes, trying to process everything. Maya waited patiently, not asking questions, just being present the way she'd learned to do when her mother needed space to think. Finally, Claire made another call. Sister Maria at the shelter in Chicago, the woman who'd helped them find housing resources, who'd kept Claire's mail when they had no address, who'd been more family than Claire's actual family ever had. Claire? I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Is everything okay? No. Sister Maria, I need help. She explained everything. The workshop, the collection, Vernon's bequest, her siblings' legal attack. The words spilled out in a rush. 3 years of suppressed pain mixing with new crisis. And Sister Maria listened without interrupting until Claire finally ran out of breath. And you're in Pennsylvania now? With Maya? Yes. I need to get back to work, but if I leave, they'll use it against me. But if I stay, I'll lose my job. I don't know what to do. You fight. Sister Maria's voice was firm. You fight because Vernon gave you a gift and your siblings don't deserve to steal it. You fight because Maya deserves a mother who stands up to bullies. You fight because giving up is what they expect, and you've never been someone who meets low expectations. I can't afford lawyers. Then we find another way. Claire, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I know legal aid attorneys, advocacy groups, people who help when the system is rigged against you. Give me until this afternoon. I'll make some calls. After hanging up, Claire turned to Maya. Baby, we need to go back to the workshop. There's something Uncle Vernon wanted me to check. They drove through Millbrook's empty morning streets, arriving at 847 Industrial Drive just after 8 a.m. Claire unlocked the building with hands that shook slightly, adrenaline and exhaustion combining into a jittery awareness of how precarious everything had become. The safe sat exactly where she'd last seen it, massive and rust-covered and seemingly immovable. Claire approached it slowly, pulling out her phone to reference the combination Vernon had left, July 13th, 1959, her mother's birthday. The woman who'd raised 4 children alone after their father died, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, who'd died of cancer when Claire was 19, and the siblings had immediately fractured into competing factions fighting over her small estate. Claire's fingers found the combination dial, cool metal worn smooth by decades. She turned it carefully, right to 7, left past the row to 13, right to 59. The mechanism was stiff, resistant, but it moved. She pulled the handle. Nothing. Claire tried again, more carefully this time, making sure each number aligned exactly. July 13th, 59. Turn the handle. This time, something inside the safe clicked. The sound of tumblers falling into place, of locks releasing. The handle moved, and with a groan of metal on metal that had been sealed for decades, the safe door swung open. Maya pressed close, both of them peering into darkness that smelled of old paper, something metallic. Claire used her phone flashlight to illuminate the interior and stopped breathing. The safe was packed floor to ceiling with metal boxes. Not modern fireproof containers, but vintage strong boxes with brass fittings and heavy locks. Each one labeled in Vernon's handwriting with dates and numbers that didn't immediately make sense. Claire pulled out the first box, surprised by its weight. The lock was open. Vernon had apparently left everything accessible once the safe itself was opened. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, were gold coins. Dozens of them, gleaming in the phone's light, each one stamped with dates from the 1800s and early 1900s. A handwritten note sat on top. American Gold Eagles and Double Eagles, 1850 to 1933. Purchased gradually 1975 to 2010. Current value approximately $340,000. These are investment grade. Preserve them carefully. Claire set the box down with shaking hands and pulled out another. More gold coins, these ones from different countries. Swiss francs, British sovereigns, South African Krugerrands. Vernon's note, International Gold, Diversified Portfolio. Value approximately $280,000. Box after box, each one containing either gold coins, silver bars, or platinum pieces. Each one documented with purchase dates and value estimates. Each one representing Vernon's patient accumulation of precious metals over 40 years. Maya's voice came out in a whisper. Mom, is that real gold? Yes, baby. It's real. Claire's hands moved faster, pulling boxes out and photographing Vernon's notes without fully processing the numbers. By the time she reached the bottom row, her mind had gone numb, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what she was seeing. The last box was different. Larger, heavier, with a note on top written in Vernon's hand just months before his death. Claire, if you're reading this, you opened the safe. Good. That means you were brave enough to come back, to claim what's yours despite what your siblings said. This collection of precious metals represents my life savings. I bought gradually, quietly, over 40 years. I never told anyone because I learned early that talking about wealth just attracts the wrong kind of attention. Total value as of January 2024, $3. $7 million, not including the workshop equipment. Your siblings think you inherited junk. They laughed at you getting Vernon's rusty old workshop. They have no idea what's actually here. Don't tell them yet. Don't give them ammunition to use in court. Document everything first. Get proper legal representation. Protect yourself and Maya. Then, when you're ready, when you have everything in place, show them what they underestimated. The wall behind the safe opens. Pull the middle shelf, it's on a hinge. What's behind it will give you the resources to fight. I'm proud of you, Claire. Your mother would be proud too. Uncle Vernon. Claire stared at the note, reading it 3 times before the words actually registered. $3.7 million in precious metals, plus the $847,000 workshop equipment. Over $4 million total. Vernon had left her over $4 million, and her siblings had mocked her for inheriting junk. Maya tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what does the note say about the wall?" Claire approached the safe's interior, examining the shelving Vernon had mentioned. The middle shelf looked like all the others, metal bolted to the safe's interior walls. But when she pulled on it experimentally, it moved. Hinged, just like Vernon had said. The shelf swung outward, revealing a space behind the safe's back wall. Not a false back, but an actual hollow space built into the industrial wall itself, accessible only through the safe's interior. Claire shined her phone light into the darkness and saw metal filing cabinets. 3 of them, built into the wall cavity like they were part of the building structure. She pulled open the first drawer. Cash, bundled in bank bands, organized by denomination. Hundreds, 50s, 20s. Enough that Claire couldn't even estimate the amount at a glance. The second drawer held stock certificates. Original paper shares from companies Claire recognized: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, purchased in the 1980s and 1990s when they were worth pennies. Vernon's notes documented each purchase, complete with dates and reasoning. Microsoft, 1986, $21 per share. Bought 1,000 shares. Let grow. The third drawer contained more documents. Property deeds to buildings in Millbrook's industrial district, purchased during the economic collapse after the mill closed. Mineral rights to land in western Pennsylvania. Business holdings in companies Claire had never heard of. Each document annotated with Vernon's careful notes about acquisition cost, current value, potential future worth. Claire sank to the floor, her legs unable to support her anymore. This wasn't just a collection of tools and precious metals. This was a complete financial portfolio built over half a century by a man everyone had dismissed as a simple factory worker. Vernon had been wealthy. Not comfortable, but genuinely, transformatively wealthy. And he'd hidden it all, living modestly in a small house. Driving an old truck, spending his free time in this workshop restoring tools while building a fortune behind a rusty safe everyone assumed was empty. Maya sat beside her mother, small hand finding Claire's. "Is this good?" Claire's laugh came out shaky, edged with hysteria. "Yeah, baby. This is really good." But even as she said it, Claire's mind was already racing ahead to implications. Her siblings couldn't know about this, not yet. Vernon's warning was clear. Document everything. Get legal protection in place. Prepare for the battle before revealing the true stakes. Because if Richard found out about this now, with the temporary restraining order in place, with Bennett and Cross already mobilized, they would come at her with everything. Would claim the gold was estate property that should be split equally, that Vernon couldn't possibly have been competent if he'd hidden this much wealth, that Claire's discovery was actually theft. She needed to move faster than they could react. Needed to secure everything before they realized what they were actually fighting over. Claire stood, decision crystallizing from chaos. "Maya, we need to document everything. Every box, every note, every piece of paper. Can you help me take pictures?" For the next 3 hours, they photographed every single item in the safe and the hidden wall cavity. Claire had Maya hold Vernon's notes while she captured each page, each handwritten comment, each valuation estimate. They worked methodically, making sure nothing was missed. By noon, Claire had over 400 photographs documenting Vernon's complete hidden fortune. She uploaded everything to 3 separate cloud storage services, texted copies to Sister Maria with instructions to save them immediately, and emailed them to herself at 2 different addresses. Then she carefully returned everything to exactly how they'd found it. Closed the hidden wall panel, latched the safe door shut, spun the combination dial to random numbers. To anyone walking in, nothing would look disturbed. The safe would still appear to be a rusty old relic Vernon had never bothered opening. But Claire now knew the truth, and she had documentation that would stand up in any court. Her phone rang at 12:47 p.m. Sister Maria, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Claire, I found you a lawyer. Margaret Shun. She specializes in probate litigation, and she's helped victims of financial abuse for 20 years. She's willing to take your case pro bono if the facts are as clear as I told her." "Pro bono?" "Sister Maria, this case could take months. She's seen the documents I've forwarded. She thinks your sibling's petition is frivolous harassment, and she's personally offended by how they're trying to manipulate the system. She wants to meet you today, if possible." Claire glanced at Maya, who'd curled up in Vernon's desk chair, exhausted from hours of photographing. "We're still in Pennsylvania. At the workshop." "Perfect. She's in Pittsburgh, about an hour from Millbrook. She could drive to you." "Claire, I sent her the photographs you took of the safe contents. She says if everything you documented is legitimate, your siblings don't stand a chance. But she needs to meet you in person, verify everything, before she can officially take the case." Margaret Chin arrived at 3:15 p.m. in a practical Honda sedan that had clearly seen better decades. She was 50-something, with steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and eyes that assessed Claire and Maya with sharp intelligence before softening into something approaching warmth. "Ms. Hendricks, I'm Margaret Shun. Sister Maria speaks very highly of you." They shook hands, Claire acutely aware of her own rumpled clothes and exhausted appearance. Margaret didn't seem to notice or care. "Thank you for coming. I don't know what Sister Maria told you. She told me your uncle left you a valuable collection. Your siblings are trying to steal it using legal intimidation, and you've discovered assets they don't know about yet." Margaret's voice was crisp, professional. "She sent me photographs of handwritten notes referencing millions of dollars in precious metals and financial holdings. Before I can take this case, I need to verify those assets exist and that your documentation is accurate." Claire led her to the safe, explaining Vernon's letter and the combination. Margaret watched with sharp attention as Claire opened it, photographed the process, and then carefully pulled out boxes one at a time. The lawyer examined Vernon's notes with the focus of someone who'd seen too many fraudulent claims to take anything at face value. She photographed the gold coins, checked dates and mint marks, pulled up current market prices on her phone, and compared them to Vernon's estimates. "These are legitimate, museum quality in some cases." Margaret's voice carried a note of amazement. "Your uncle knew what he was doing." Claire showed her the hidden wall panel, the filing cabinets, the cash and stock certificates, and property deeds. Margaret's professionalism cracked slightly as the magnitude of Vernon's portfolio became clear. "Ms. Hendricks, if everything here is as documented, we're talking about a fortune. Your siblings filed a petition claiming you're incompetent to manage an $800,000 workshop collection. They have no idea what you've actually inherited. Vernon told me not to tell them. Not until I had legal protection." "Smart man." Margaret pulled out a laptop, began typing notes rapidly. "Here's what's going to happen. Monday morning, I'm filing a motion to dismiss your siblings' petition as frivolous harassment. I'm also filing for sanctions against their attorneys for bringing a baseless claim clearly designed to intimidate rather than protect the estate." "Can you do that?" "Watch me." Bennett and Cross relies on intimidation. They file aggressive motions, bet that people can't afford to fight back, then negotiate settlements that benefit their clients. They're not used to opposition from someone who actually knows the law. Margaret's smile was sharp. "I'm going to make them regret taking this case." Claire felt something unfurl in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the first real breath she'd taken since seeing Richard in the workshop yesterday. "What about the restraining order?" "I'm supposed to appear Tuesday for a hearing." "We'll be ready. By Tuesday, I'll have filed motions, gathered documentation, and prepared arguments that will make your siblings' petition look like the money grab it is. Trust me, Ms. Hendricks, by the time I'm done, Judge Morrison will be apologizing for granting that temporary order." Maya had been silent through the whole exchange, watching from Vernon's desk chair. Now she spoke up, her voice small but steady. "Are you going to help my mom?" Margaret looked at her, and Claire saw the lawyer's expression soften. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to help your mom. Because what your great uncle did, leaving this collection to her, that was a gift. And people who try to steal gifts don't deserve to win." They spent the rest of the afternoon building Claire's case. Margaret had her write out a complete timeline of her relationship with Vernon, her siblings' theft of her father's insurance money, every instance of financial abuse and manipulation she could remember. It was painful, dragging up memories Claire had tried to suppress. But Margaret's sharp questions forced clarity. I need specifics. Dates, amounts, exact quotes if you can remember them. Your siblings are going to paint you as unstable and irresponsible. We're going to show a pattern of them systematically stealing from you while gaslighting you into thinking you're the problem. By 7 p.m., Claire's hand was cramping from writing and her head pounded from stress and skipped meals. Margaret finally closed her laptop and fixed Claire with a serious look. Tomorrow morning, I file motions. Monday afternoon, we'll get responses from Bennett and Cross. They're predictable. They'll call this a desperate attempt to avoid accountability. Tuesday, we go to court. Between now and then, you don't talk to your siblings, don't respond to their emails or calls, don't engage in any way. Everything goes through me. What if they come here? To the workshop? They can't. The restraining order works both ways. They're not allowed on this property either. If they show up, you call the police immediately. Don't open the door, don't negotiate. Just call 911. Margaret stood, gathering her laptop and files. Ms. Hendricks, I'm going to be honest with you. Your siblings hired Bennett and Cross because they're ruthless and expensive. They're betting that you'll fold under pressure. What they don't know is that you're sitting on documentation of a $4 million estate. You've got every transaction documented by the deceased, and you've hired a lawyer who's made a career out of beating firms like theirs. She paused at the door, her expression softening slightly. Vernon chose well. I can see why he trusted you with this. After Margaret left, Claire and Maya sat in the workshop's small office, both of them too exhausted to move. The weight of the day pressed down like physical force, the safe, the gold, the lawyer, the documentation. Everything that had been impossible yesterday, suddenly real and overwhelming. Maya's stomach growled audibly, reminding Claire they'd subsisted on continental breakfast and stress all day. Come on, baby. Let's find dinner. They drove to a diner on Millbrook's Main Street, one of the few restaurants still operating. Claire ordered carefully, hyper-aware of her dwindling cash. Grilled cheese for Maya, soup for herself, water instead of soda. While they waited for food, Claire's phone buzzed. Unknown number, Pennsylvania, area code. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Claire? Daniel's voice, carefully neutral. Don't hang up, please. Margaret told me not to talk to you. I know, but I'm not calling about the case. I'm calling because Richard and Patricia don't know I'm doing this, and I need you to understand something before Tuesday. Claire should have hung up. Margaret's instructions had been clear. But Daniel's tone was different from the calculated reasonableness he'd used yesterday. Quieter, almost genuine. I have 60 seconds before I end this call. Richard's planning to bring Maya into this. Patricia found a child welfare attorney who's willing to file an emergency custody petition claiming you're an unfit mother. They're going to argue that your history of homelessness, your mental health struggles, your inability to maintain stable housing, all of it proves Maya should be in foster care while you're evaluated. Claire's vision tunneled. They can't do that. They can try. And even if they lose, the process will destroy you. Child services investigations, home visits, Maya being interviewed by strangers about whether she feels safe with you. Richard knows you'll do anything to protect her. He's betting you'll surrender the workshop to make the custody threat go away. Why are you telling me this? Daniel's pause stretched long enough that Claire thought the connection had dropped. Then, because I watched them do this same thing to you 3 years ago with Dad's insurance money. Watched them gaslight you until you believed you were the problem. And I didn't say anything because it benefited me too. I took my share and told myself you'd made bad choices, that it wasn't our responsibility to fix your life. His voice roughened. But using Maya as leverage? Threatening to put a 9-year-old into the system just to steal money? That's too far. Even for Richard. Are you withdrawing from their petition? I can't. Richard's already paid Bennett and Cross a $50,000 retainer, and my name's on the paperwork. But I can give you a heads up about their strategy. And I can tell you that the child welfare attorney they hired is Marcus Webb. He's a known quantity in family court, and Judge Anderson, who handles juvenile cases, can't stand him. If they file, it'll backfire. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't. I've given you no reason to trust me. But Claire, I saw Mom's birthday on Vernon's note. The combination to that safe you opened. I know there's more in there than just workshop equipment. Claire's breath stopped. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And whatever it is, it's big enough that Vernon hid it for decades. Big enough that Richard would destroy his own niece's life to get access to it. Daniel's voice dropped. Don't tell them what you found. Not until after Tuesday's hearing. Let them commit to their story. Let Bennett and Cross put all their arguments on record, and then show the judge what you actually inherited. Their whole case will collapse. The call ended before Claire could respond. She sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process whether Daniel's warning was genuine or another manipulation, whether he was actually trying to help or just positioning himself for whatever came next. Maya reached across the table, small hand finding Claire's. Was that Uncle Daniel? Yeah, baby. Is he going to help us? Claire looked at her daughter's serious face. This 9-year-old who'd learned to read adult complications like survival manuals and couldn't find a good answer. I don't know, but we're not going to need his help. We have Margaret, and we have Uncle Vernon's documentation, and we have each other. The waitress brought their food, grilled cheese and soup that suddenly felt inadequate against the magnitude of what they were facing. But Claire made herself eat, made sure Maya finished her dinner, practiced the normalcy they'd need to maintain when everything felt like it was spiraling. They drove back to the Hampton Inn through Millbrook's empty streets. Claire checked them in for another night, watching her credit card balance tick closer to its limit, knowing she should be conserving every dollar, but unable to face the 8-hour drive tonight. In their room, Maya fell asleep almost immediately, stress and exhaustion finally overwhelming her small body. Claire sat at the desk with her laptop, going through the photographs she'd taken, making sure every image was clear, every note legible. Vernon's careful handwriting documented 50 years of patient accumulation. Gold purchased gradually during economic downturns. Stocks bought when companies were startups. Properties acquired when Millbrook was dying and land was cheap. Each decision explained, each investment tracked with engineer's precision. He'd built this fortune in deliberate silence, never attracting attention, never giving anyone reason to question his modest lifestyle. And he'd left it all to Claire, not because she was family, but because he'd watched her give when others took, survive when others quit, maintain integrity when everyone around her was making excuses for cruelty. Claire pulled out the letter Vernon had left with Kellerman and read it again, tears blurring the words. Asterisk, you are more capable than they will ever be, specifically because you understand that value isn't just measured in money. Asterisk, she thought about Richard's expensive suits and empty relationships, Patricia's real estate success built on stepping over people, Daniel's moral flexibility that let him justify any decision as pragmatic. They measured worth in dollars and status, in who had more and who had less. Vernon had measured worth differently, in loyalty, in perseverance, in the quiet strength of someone who kept going when every logical reason said to give up. Tomorrow, Margaret would start fighting. Tuesday, they'd face Richard and Patricia and Bennett and Cross in court. And somewhere in that battle, Claire would prove that she was exactly who Vernon had believed her to be. Someone worth trusting with a legacy built over 50 years. Someone strong enough to protect it from people who only knew how to take. Someone who wouldn't surrender, no matter how hard they try to break her. Claire set an alarm for 6 a.m., crawled into bed beside Maya, and let herself hope, carefully, cautiously, that maybe this time the good guys would actually win. Margaret Chun filed her motions at 8:03 a.m. Monday morning, and by 10:30 a.m., Claire's phone was exploding with notifications. Richard called 6 times in 15 minutes. Patricia sent a dozen text messages that escalated from concern to threatening. Even lawyers from Bennett and Cross left voicemails demanding immediate contact. Claire ignored them all, following Margaret's instructions exactly. At 2:47 p.m., Margaret called with an update that made Claire's hands shake. Bennett and Cross filed a response. It's aggressive. They're claiming your motion to dismiss is frivolous, that you're using legal theatrics to avoid accountability, and they've added 3 additional claims to their original petition. What kind of claims? They're now alleging that you coerced Vernon while he was dying, that you isolated him from family, and that your sudden discovery of valuable items in the safe constitutes theft of his state property. Margaret's voice was tight with controlled fury. They're also subpoenaing your medical records, employment history, and financial statements for the past 5 years. They want to paint a picture of instability and desperation. Claire's stomach dropped. Can they do that? They could try. I'm going to fight every subpoena. But Claire, they're going scorched earth. This isn't about the workshop anymore. They're trying to destroy your credibility completely so that even if you win, your reputation is shredded. What about the custody threat? Daniel warned me they were going after Maya. A pause. Daniel called you? Last night. He said Richard and Patricia hired a child welfare attorney to file an emergency custody petition. Margaret's silence stretched long enough to make Claire nervous. Then that changes things. If they're planning to weaponize Child Protective Services, we need to get ahead of it. I'm going to file a protective motion today arguing that any custody claims are retaliatory harassment designed to coerce you into surrendering property rights. But Claire, you need to be prepared. If they actually file, even frivolous custody cases can take months to resolve. After the call ended, Claire sat in the workshop's small office, staring at walls lined with Vernon's meticulous records, and tried to process the reality that her siblings would literally try to take her child to get their hands on money. Maya was at the Millbrook Public Library. Claire had enrolled her in their kids program for the day, needing her daughter somewhere safe and supervised while she dealt with legal fires. Now Claire pulled out her phone and called Sister Maria. They're threatening custody. They're going to claim I'm an unfit mother. Then we show them you're not. Sister Maria's voice was firm. Claire, I've known you for 3 years. I've watched you sacrifice everything to keep Maya safe, healthy, and loved. I will testify to that. So will every social worker who's ever worked with you. So will Maya's teachers. They can drag you through hell, but they won't win. What if they do? What if a judge decides that someone who was homeless 2 years ago shouldn't have custody? That judge would be wrong, and we'd appeal. And we'd keep fighting until someone with sense realized that poverty doesn't equal bad parenting. Sister Maria paused. But Claire, it's not going to come to that. Margaret Chun doesn't lose cases like this. And from what you've told me about Vernon's estate, your siblings are about to learn exactly who they underestimated. That evening, Claire picked up Maya from the library and drove her to the small park on Millbrook's west side. They sat on swings that creaked with rust and age, both of them too heavy for equipment designed for younger children, and watched the sun set behind the abandoned steel mill that loomed like a monument to economic collapse. Mom, Maya's voice was quiet. Are they going to take me away? Claire's heart cracked. She tried so hard to shield Maya from the worst of this, but her 9-year-old daughter had always been too perceptive to fool. They're going to try. But baby, I promise you, I will fight with everything I have to keep you safe. Do you understand? Everything. What if you can't win? The question was so small, so frightened, that Claire had to close her eyes against sudden tears. Maya had already lost so much. Her father, 3 years old, stability, homes that lasted longer than a few months. The thought of her daughter being placed in foster care, of strangers making decisions about her life while Claire was helpless to protect her, was physically painful. Then I'll appeal, and appeal again, and again, until we find someone who sees the truth, that you are loved and safe, and that no amount of money is worth separating us. Maya was quiet for a long moment, feet dragging in the dirt beneath the swing. Then, Uncle Vernon left you. The money, so we could have a home, right? So we wouldn't have to live in the car anymore? Yeah, baby. Then it already worked. Because even if we lose in court, even if they take the workshop and all the gold and everything else, we've had 2 days where I wasn't scared. 2 days where you smiled for real instead of pretending. That's already more than we had before. Claire pulled Maya into a fierce hug, this wise, impossibly brave child who'd learned to measure happiness in days instead of years. who'd learned that sometimes survival itself was victory. "We're not going to lose," Claire whispered into her daughter's hair. "I won't let them do this to us." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her confidence. Richard had money and lawyers and decades of practice manipulating systems to his advantage. Patricia knew how to perform concern convincingly enough to fool social workers. Daniel might be having second thoughts, but he wasn't actually helping, just warning her about attacks while staying safely on the sidelines. And Claire had a pro bono lawyer, a workshop full of valuable items she couldn't sell yet, and a fortune in gold she couldn't access without triggering legal warfare. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray, threatening snow despite it being only October. Claire dressed carefully in the one professional outfit she owned, black pants and a gray blazer she'd bought at Goodwill for job interviews. Maya wore her nicest school clothes, dark jeans, and a sweater that was only slightly too small. They met Margaret at the Jefferson County Courthouse at 8:30 a.m. The building was the same imposing stone structure Claire remembered from Vernon's while reading 3 years ago, all polished marble and echoing hallways designed to make ordinary people feel small. Richard, Patricia, and Daniel were already there, clustered near the courtroom entrance with their legal team. For attorneys from Bennett and Cross, all of them in expensive suits that screamed money and confidence. Claire recognized the lead attorney from his website photo, James Bennett himself, senior partner, known for aggressive litigation and winning impossible cases through sheer financial attrition. Richard saw them and smiled. It wasn't a warm expression, more like a predator spotting prey. Patricia approached with false concern etched into every feature. "Claire, honey, you didn't have to bring Maya to this. We could have arranged childcare. Maya stays with me. It's just that courtrooms can be so traumatic for children, especially when their mother is being—" Patricia paused delicately, evaluated. Margaret stepped between them, her voice cutting. "Ms. Monroe, you and your siblings are not to approach my client directly. All communication goes through me. Are we clear?" Patricia's concerned mask slipped slightly, revealing cold calculation underneath. "Of course. We're just worried about our niece. Your concern is noted and rejected. Now please step back." They entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m. Judge Karen Morrison presided, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie the legal system could produce. Claire had researched her over the weekend. 23 years on the bench, reputation for being tough, but fair, no tolerance for frivolous motions. The hearing began with James Bennett standing to present his client's position. His voice was smooth, reasonable, carrying the weight of someone who'd made this same argument 100 times before. "Your Honor, we're here today because of serious concerns about Ms. Claire Hendricks' capacity to manage a substantial estate left by her uncle, Vernon Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks was a private man who accumulated valuable property over many decades. His decision to leave everything to Ms. Hendricks, a woman with a documented history of financial instability, homelessness, and poor judgment, raises legitimate questions about his mental state at the time the will was executed." Claire felt Maya's hand tighten in hers. Bennett continued, "Ms. Hendricks was homeless 2 years ago. She has been evicted multiple times, has defaulted on loans, and currently works a minimum wage job barely covering basic expenses. These facts are not attacks on her character. They're simply reality. A reality that makes her singularly unqualified to manage an estate potentially worth over $1 million." He pulled out a stack of documents. "Furthermore, we have evidence suggesting that Ms. Hendricks isolated Mr. Vernon from his family in his final months, possibly exerting undue influence to change his will. We also have concerns about items that have allegedly been discovered in Mr. Vernon's workshop after his death, discoveries that Ms. Hendricks claims justify the bequest, but which may actually constitute theft of estate property." Margaret rose smoothly. "Your Honor, I'd like to address those allegations directly." Judge Morrison nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Chun." "First, regarding Ms. Hendricks' financial history. My client experienced homelessness after her siblings, the very people now claiming to be concerned about her welfare, stole $80,000 from her. This theft occurred when Ms. Hendricks' father died and left insurance money split equally among his 4 children. Richard, Patricia, and Daniel Hendricks convinced their sister to lend them money for various emergencies, signed promissory notes promising repayment, and then defaulted on every loan while blocking her attempt to collect. Margaret placed a thick folder on the table. I have documentation of every loan, every promise, every text message where my client begged for repayment while her siblings ignored her. What Bennett and Cross calls poor financial judgment was actually systematic theft by family members she trusted. Your Honor, this is irrelevant, Bennett started. I'll determine relevance, Judge Morrison said coolly. Continue, Ms. Chun. Second, regarding undue influence. Mr. Vernon had 0 contact with Ms. Hendricks in the 3 years before his death. She didn't visit him, didn't call him, didn't attend family gatherings because she'd been essentially exiled by these same siblings. Vernon's attorney, Thomas Kellerman, has submitted affidavits confirming that Vernon was of sound mind, that he explicitly discussed why he was leaving the workshop to Claire and not her siblings, and that he anticipated exactly this kind of legal challenge. Margaret pulled out another document. Vernon left a letter to be opened if his will was challenged. In it, he specifically states, Richard and Patricia and Daniel take. Claire gives. That's why I'm leaving her this collection. He knew his nephews and niece would claim incompetence. He knew they'd try to steal from Claire the same way they'd stolen before, and he took steps to protect her. Bennett stood again, his smooth confidence showing the first cracks. Your Honor, a letter written by a dying man doesn't prove sound mind. It proves sentiment, possibly confusion. The fact remains that Ms. Hendricks is objectively unqualified. The fact remains, Margaret interrupted sharply, that Vernon Hendricks was a retired machinist with a degree in mechanical engineering who built his collection over 50 years. He documented every purchase, every restoration, every decision with engineer's precision. The insurance appraisal commission 3 weeks before his death shows a collection valued at $847,000. Not exactly the act of confused man. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Chun, I've reviewed the temporary restraining order I granted Friday evening. Mr. Bennett presented evidence suggesting Ms. Hendricks was planning to liquidate the estate immediately without proper consideration. Do you have evidence to counter that claim? I do, Your Honor. Ms. Hendricks made 1 trip to Pennsylvania to inspect property she'd been legally entitled to claim for 3 years. She spent approximately 4 hours in the workshop documenting items before her siblings showed up uninvited, trespassed on her property, and threatened her. She called police to have them removed. At no point did she attempt to sell, remove, or liquidate anything. Margaret's voice sharpened. What actually happened is that Richard, Patricia, and Daniel Hendricks learned their sister had inherited something valuable, something they'd previously mocked as worthless junk. The moment they realized their mockery was wrong, they hired the most expensive litigation firm in the state and filed an emergency petition designed to intimidate my client into surrender. Bennett's facade cracked further. Your Honor, Ms. Chun is making wild accusations. I'm making documented statements. Margaret shot back. Bennett and Cross accepted a $50,000 retainer Friday afternoon and filed an emergency petition at 8:30 p.m. that same evening. They found a judge willing to grant a restraining order based on nothing but speculation and their client's manufacturer concern. This is legal harassment, pure and simple. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Both of you sit down. I've heard enough. The courtroom went silent. Claire's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Maya pressed close, barely breathing. Judge Morrison studied the documents in front of her for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. Then she looked directly at Richard, Patricia, and Daniel. I'm going to ask you 3 a direct question, and I expect truthful answers. Did any of you visit Vernon Hendricks in the 6 months before his death? Richard shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, Vernon was a private person. That's not what I asked. Did you visit him? Yes or no? No. Did you call him? Occasionally. How occasionally? Once a month? Once a week? Richard's silence was damning. Patricia spoke up, her voice carrying practiced sincerity. Your Honor, Vernon made it clear he wanted to be left alone. We respected his wishes. But you didn't respect his will. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. You respected his privacy when he was alive and could actually use your company, but the moment he died and left property to someone else, suddenly you're deeply concerned about proper estate management. She turned to Claire. Ms. Hendricks, stand up. Claire stood on shaking legs. You were homeless 2 years ago. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Claire's throat was dry. My siblings stole the money my father left me. I couldn't make rent. I got evicted. My daughter and I lived in my car for about 6 months before I found housing assistance. And now you work at Sacred Heart Hospital in Chicago. Yes, ma'am. Medical records clerk. You drove 8 hours to Pennsylvania to claim this inheritance. Yes, ma'am. Why didn't you claim it 3 years ago when Vernon died? The question hit harder than Claire expected. She felt tears threaten but forced them back. Because I was ashamed. Because my siblings had made it clear I was a failure and an embarrassment. Because I thought Uncle Vernon's workshop was just more proof that even family charity came with conditions. But you came back now. Yes, ma'am. Because I got a letter saying if I didn't claim it within 30 days, everything would be sold at auction. And because my daughter deserves better than what I've been able to give her. Judge Morrison studied Claire for a long moment. Then she looked at the legal teams, her expression unreadable. Here's what I see. An elderly man with no children left his life's work to his niece, a woman who'd been systematically robbed by her other relatives. He did so knowing those same relatives would challenge the bequest. He took steps to document his intentions and protect his chosen heir. 3 years pass. The heir finally claims what's legally hers. And immediately, the relatives who stole from her once before hire expensive lawyers to steal from her again. Bennett stood. Your Honor, with respect, I'm not finished. Judge Morrison's voice could have cut steel. I'm dissolving the temporary restraining order effective immediately. Ms. Hendricks has full access to her property and all contents thereof. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Richard shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is, furthermore, I'm awarding sanctions against Bennett and Cross for filing a frivolous emergency petition without proper grounds. $15,000 to be paid to Ms. Chun for her time defending against this harassment. James Bennett's face went white. Your Honor, we had good faith belief. You had a wealthy client willing to pay your retainer. That's not the same thing as good faith. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. Case dismissed. And Mr. Hendricks, Ms. Monroe, Mr. Hendricks, if you file any future actions related to this estate without substantial evidence, I will hold you personally responsible for all legal fees incurred by your sister. Are we clear? The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Claire stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Maya's hand squeezed hers so hard it hurt. Margaret was gathering papers with barely suppressed satisfaction. And Richard's face had gone from red to purple. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped, and Daniel was staring at the floor. They'd won. Vernon's bequest was secure. The workshop, the tools, everything in the safe, it was all legally, completely, irrevocably Claire's. Outside the courthouse, Richard exploded. His voice carried across the parking lot, attracting attention from other people leaving other hearings. This isn't over, Claire. You think you could just steal our inheritance? It was never your inheritance, Margaret said calmly. Vernon was very clear about that. He was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. He was evaluated by doctors 3 weeks before his death and deemed fully competent. Judge Morrison just reviewed that evidence. Your challenge failed because it had no merit. Patricia tried a different approach, her voice softening into false reasonableness. Claire, please. We're family. Can we at least talk about this privately, without lawyers? No. Claire's voice was steadier than she expected. You stole from me once. You tried to steal from me again. And according to my brother Daniel, you were planning to file for custody of my daughter to force me to give up Vernon's estate. We're done talking. Patricia's mask cracked. Daniel told you that? He warned me, which is more than the rest of you have ever done. Richard stepped forward, and Margaret moved to intercept. "Mr. Hendricks, you're approaching my client in a threatening manner. I will call the police." "You have no idea what you've done," Richard hissed, looking at Claire. "That workshop? Whatever you think is in there. It doesn't matter. You're still the same failure you've always been. You'll screw this up like you screw up everything, and when you do, we'll be there to pick up the pieces." Claire met his eyes steadily. "Uncle Vernon didn't think I was a failure. He trusted me with 50 years of his work. That's more than he ever trusted you with." She turned and walked to her car, Margaret and Maya following. They didn't look back, didn't give Richard and Patricia the satisfaction of seeing them scared or uncertain. Behind them, Claire heard Patricia's voice, sharp with fury. "Daniel, what did you tell her?" But they were already pulling out of the parking lot, leaving her siblings and their expensive lawyers standing in the cold October morning. Having lost a battle, they'd been certain they'd win. The drive back to the workshop was silent, except for Maya's quiet crying. Not sad tears, relief. The kind of crying that comes when tension held too long finally releases. Margaret followed in her own car. Once inside the workshop, she locked the door behind them and pulled out her laptop. "Okay, now we deal with what's really in that safe." Claire opened it again, pulling out the boxes of gold coins, the hidden wall panel, the filing cabinets full of cash and stock certificates. Margaret documented everything with professional detachment that cracked slightly when she pulled out the stock certificates. "Ms. Hendricks, these Microsoft shares alone are worth over $1 million. Apple, Amazon, Google, Vernon bought early and held. This is extraordinary." They spent 3 hours cataloging everything. Margaret photographed each item, each note, each document. She called in a colleague who specialized in estate valuation, who arrived with equipment to verify gold authenticity and current market prices. By 4 p.m., they had a complete inventory. Workshop equipment, $847,000. Precious metals, $3,742,000. Stock holdings, $2,180,000. Cash, $340,000. Real estate and business holdings, $1,200,000. Total estimated value, $8,309,000. Claire stared at the number. $8,309,000. Vernon hadn't just been wealthy. He'd been genuinely rich, and he'd hidden it so completely that even insurance appraisers hadn't found everything. Margaret's colleague packed up his equipment, promised a formal appraisal within a week, and left shaking his head in amazement. Margaret closed her laptop and looked at Claire seriously. "Your siblings will find out eventually. Maybe not the exact amount, but they'll hear rumors. Millbrook's small, people talk. And when they learn the true scale of what you inherited, they'll try again. Different approach, different lawyers, but the same goal." Can they? Not easily. Judge Morrison's ruling was clear. But people with enough money can make life difficult even when they can't win legally. Harassment, public accusations, media campaigns, they have options. Claire thought about Richard's parting threat, about Patricia's cold calculation, about Daniel's warning that might have been genuine or might have been another manipulation. What do I do? You protect yourself. Set up trusts, hire security for the workshop, get proper insurance. Move the most valuable items to secure storage. And most importantly, you live your life. Don't let the fear of what they might do stop you from using this gift the way Vernon intended. That evening, after Margaret left, and Maya fell asleep on the workshop's small couch, exhausted from stress and relief, Claire sat at Vernon's desk and pulled out his final letter. She'd read it a dozen times already, but tonight the words hit differently. Asterisk, don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them convince you that you're not capable. You are more capable than they will ever be, specifically because you understand that value isn't just measured in money. Asterisk, asterisk, the safe contains enough wealth to change your life and Maya's life forever. But more importantly, it contains proof that patience and integrity matter. That giving is more valuable than taking. That character is worth more than any fortune. Asterisk, asterisk, your siblings will never understand that. They'll see dollar signs and think they're entitled to a share. They'll claim family means equal distribution. They'll use every manipulation they know to make you feel guilty for keeping what I explicitly left to you. Asterisk, asterisk, don't listen. This is yours, earned not by blood, but by being the kind of person worth trusting with a legacy built over 50 years. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm proud of you, Claire. Your mother would be proud too. Asterisk, asterisk, use this gift wisely. Help others. Build something good. And never let anyone make you feel unworthy of the kindness you've earned through being genuinely kind yourself. Asterisk, Uncle Vernon. Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then she pulled out her phone and started making lists. First priority, proper security for the workshop. Cameras, alarms, reinforced locks. The gold couldn't stay here, too vulnerable. Second, secure storage for the precious metals. A bank vault in Pittsburgh, maybe, somewhere insured and protected. Third, set up trusts for Maya's education, for their housing, for long-term stability. Margaret could help with that. Fourth, figure out what to do with her life now that poverty wasn't dictating every decision. That last one felt overwhelming. For 3 years, Claire's entire existence had been defined by scarcity. Every choice filtered through, can we afford this? Every opportunity measured against, will this cover rent? Now suddenly, those constraints didn't exist anymore. Maya could have her own bedroom, her own house, if Claire wanted. They could live anywhere, do anything, build whatever life they'd been dreaming about during those nights in the Ford Focus. The freedom was terrifying. Claire's phone buzzed. Text from Sister Maria. Asterisk, I heard you won. I'm so proud of you, dear. Come home when you're ready. Your apartment is waiting. Asterisk, another text. This one from an unknown number. Asterisk, it's Daniel. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm glad you won today. Richard and Patricia are furious. Be careful. Asterisk, Claire stared at Daniel's message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Maybe his warning had been genuine. Maybe he was actually having a crisis of conscience. But she couldn't afford to trust him. Couldn't risk letting him close enough to gather information he'd eventually use against her. She'd won the first battle. Vernon's estate was secure. But Margaret was right. This wasn't over. Her siblings would regroup, would find new angles of attack, would spend years trying to find a way to take what Vernon had deliberately given to someone else. But Claire had advantages now that she'd never had before. Money for lawyers, documentation that proved every claim, and most importantly, the absolute certainty that Vernon had seen her worth when her own family had been determined to dismiss her. She wasn't the failure Richard claimed she was. She wasn't the incompetent charity case Patricia pitted. She was a woman who'd survived homelessness, protected her daughter through impossible circumstances, and built a life from scraps of dignity everyone else had tried to take. And now she had the resources to prove it. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Margaret helped Claire establish a trust with Maya as primary beneficiary. They moved the precious metals to secure storage in Pittsburgh, each box carefully cataloged and insured. The workshop equipment stayed in place, but Claire hired a security company to install cameras and alarms that would alert her to any unauthorized access. She filed paperwork to officially transfer all property deeds and business holdings into her name. Each document signed felt like another layer of protection, another wall between her inheritance and her siblings' grasping hands. On Friday, 1 week after the court hearing, Claire and Maya drove back to Chicago. The Ford made concerning noises the entire trip, but they made it home to their studio apartment just after midnight. The apartment looked different now. Smaller, more cramped, but also temporary in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't home anymore. It was just where they were staying until Claire figured out what came next. Maya collapsed into their Murphy bed without changing clothes, and Claire sat on the floor beside her, watching her daughter sleep. This child who'd lived through so much, who'd been so brave, who deserved everything Claire could now finally give her. In the morning, Claire would call Sacred Heart Hospital and give her notice. 2 weeks, professional and courteous, no burned bridges. Then she'd start looking for a real home, maybe in Chicago, maybe back in Pennsylvania near the workshop, maybe somewhere entirely new where no one knew their history. She'd set up the foundation Vernon had mentioned in his notes. help other single mothers who'd been where she'd been. Women living in cars, sleeping in shelters, choosing between food and medicine because there wasn't enough money for both. Vernon had given her more than wealth. He'd given her proof that surviving didn't make you weak. It made you strong enough to help others survive too. Claire's phone buzzed one more time. Email from Thomas Kellerman with the subject line, Final Estate Documents. She opened it, finding scanned copies of Vernon's complete will and a cover letter. Asterisk, Ms. Hendricks, I'm forwarding Vernon's final instructions regarding his estate. He was very specific about his wishes and very clear about his reasoning. I thought you should have a complete copy for your records. Asterisk, asterisk, I worked with Vernon for 15 years. He was one of the most deliberate, careful people I've ever known. Everything he did was planned, considered, and executed with precision. His decision to leave you his estate was not sentimental or impulsive. It was the result of decades of observation. Asterisk, asterisk, he told me once that character reveals itself under pressure. That people show who they really are when they have nothing left to lose. He watched your family for 40 years. He saw who took and who gave, and he made his choice accordingly. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm glad Judge Morrison saw through your siblings' manipulation. Vernon would have been pleased. Asterisk, asterisk, take care of yourself and that daughter of yours. Vernon believed you were strong enough to handle this gift. Based on what I've seen, he was right. Asterisk, respectfully, Thomas Kellerman. Attached was Vernon's original will, annotated in his precise handwriting with notes that made Claire's eyes burn with tears. Next to Richard's name, asterisk, takes without asking, blames others for his failures, has his mother's temper without her kindness. Asterisk next to Patricia's, asterisk, calculates every relationship as transaction, gives only when she expects return. Her concern is performance. Asterisk next to Daniel's, asterisk, goes whichever way the wind blows. Moral flexibility masquerading as pragmatism. Can't be trusted. Asterisk and next to Claire's name, asterisk, gave her siblings the insurance money when they asked. Kept trying to help even after they abandoned her. Raised Maya alone without complaint. Survive homelessness with dignity. My brother's daughter in spirit, if not circumstance. She deserves better than what life has given her. I'm trying to balance the scales. Asterisk, Claire read that last note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Vernon had seen her, not just as the family failure everyone else saw, but as someone worth believing in. She'd spent 3 years feeling worthless, believing her siblings' assessment that she was incompetent and irresponsible. Vernon had spent 50 years proving them wrong, building a gift specifically designed for someone they'd underestimated. He'd known they'd challenge the will, known they'd try to take what wasn't theirs, known Claire would need resources to fight back, and he provided everything she needed to win. Maya stirred beside her, blinking awake. Mom? Why are you crying? Claire wiped her eyes and pulled her daughter close. Happy tears, baby. I'm crying because someone believed in us when everyone else thought we weren't worth believing in. Uncle Vernon? Yeah, Uncle Vernon. They sat together in the small apartment, morning light filtering through windows that badly needed cleaning, and Claire let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd won. Against impossible odds, against her siblings' money and lawyers and systematic cruelty, she'd won. Vernon's gift was secure. Maya's future was secure. They had breathing room for the first time in 3 years. But more than that, Claire had proven something to herself. Something she'd stopped believing after years of failure and poverty and her family's constant message that she wasn't good enough. She was capable. She was strong. She was exactly the kind of person Vernon had believed deserved his life's work. Over the next 3 months, Claire methodically built a new life. She found a house in a quiet Chicago suburb. Nothing ostentatious, just a 3-bedroom bungalow with a backyard where Maya could play. They moved in on a snowy December morning, Maya running from room to room with delight that made Claire's chest ache. The Mitchell Foundation opened its doors in February, funded by a portion of Vernon's estate specifically earmarked for helping single mothers. They provided legal aid, housing assistance, job training, and emergency funds for women escaping domestic violence or rebuilding after homelessness. Sister Maria joined the board, bringing 3 decades of experience working with vulnerable populations. The workshop stayed in Millbrook, preserved exactly as Vernon had left it. Claire converted it into a museum and training center, teaching traditional machining skills to young people interested in skilled trades. She hired Robert Hayes as director, paying him triple what Vernon had, and watched the old property manager tear up when she told him the job was his for as long as he wanted it. Richard sent exactly 1 letter, delivered through his lawyer, proposing a settlement where he'd withdraw all claims in exchange for 40% of the estate's value. Claire sent back a single sentence. Vernon's was clear. The answer is no. Patricia tried a different approach. Social media posts about family estrangement, carefully worded to make Claire look like the villain while maintaining plausible deniability. Claire blocked her on every platform and didn't respond publicly. The posts eventually stopped when no one engaged. Daniel sent Christmas cards that Claire opened but didn't respond to. Maybe he genuinely regretted his role in the family's cruelty. Maybe he was just positioning himself for future opportunities. Either way, Claire couldn't afford to find out. Some bridges once burned stayed burned. Maya thrived. She had her own room painted yellow. She'd never stopped loving yellow walls. She joined the school robotics team and discovered a talent for engineering that made Claire think about Vernon and genetic memory and the ways skills skip generations. She made friends who came over for sleepovers, who didn't know about the Ford Focus or the shelters or any of the poverty that had defined her childhood. One Saturday in April, almost exactly a year after the court hearing, Claire and Maya drove back to Millbrook for the Workshop Museum's grand opening. The town showed up in force. Betty Sullivan from the library, Officer Chun who'd taken Claire's trespass report, the waitress from the diner who'd served them grilled cheese when everything felt impossible. Robert gave a speech about Vernon's patient craftsmanship, about the value of preserving skills everyone else had dismissed as obsolete. A local high school student gave a demonstration on a lathe Vernon had restored in 1987, the machine humming with perfect precision despite being 70 years old. And in the corner, behind glass now, but still visible, sat the old safe. Empty now, its contents secured in bank vaults and trust accounts, but preserved as part of Vernon's story. A reminder that sometimes the things people dismiss as worthless turn out to be most valuable of all. The plaque beside it read, Asterisk, this safe belonged to Vernon Augustus Hendricks, 1949 to 2024. For 50 years, people assumed it was empty or broken. Vernon let them assume. Inside, he'd hidden the fortune he built through patience and integrity. He left it all to someone everyone else had underestimated, proving that character matters more than circumstance. Asterisk after the ceremony, Claire and Maya walked through the museum Vernon's workshop had become. Young people clustered around antique machines, learning skills their great-grandparents would have considered essential. Teachers explained the history of American manufacturing, the collapse of industrial towns like Millbrook, the importance of preserving knowledge even when the economy moves on. Maya tugged Claire's sleeve, pointing to a photograph on the wall. Vernon in his workshop, maybe 60 years old, standing beside the safe with a slight smile and knowing eyes. He looks happy. I think he was. He built something that mattered. Not just money, all of this. Claire gestured to the museum, the students, the preserved equipment. This is his legacy. Patient work done right, built to last. And he left it to you because he knew you'd understand that. Claire looked down at her daughter, this increasingly wise 11-year-old who'd learned more about resilience and integrity from poverty than most people learned in a lifetime of comfort. Yeah, baby, I think he did. They drove home to Chicago that evening, back to their house with yellow walls and a backyard instability that still felt fragile despite being built on millions of dollars. Claire made dinner while Maya did homework at the kitchen table. They watched a movie together before bed. They were ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of normal that had once seemed impossible. Before sleeping, Claire pulled out Vernon's letter one more time. She'd read it hundreds of times now, but the words still hit with the same force. Asterisk, use this gift wisely. Help others. Build something good. And never let anyone make you feel unworthy of the kindness you've earned through being genuinely kind yourself. She'd spent a year doing exactly that, building a foundation that helped women she'd once been, preserving Vernon's workshop as a teaching space, raising Maya in stability and peace, using wealth not to escape her past, but to help others survive their present. Richard and Patricia and Daniel were somewhere in Pennsylvania, still wealthy from their own careers, still bitter about the inheritance that had gone to someone they'd always dismissed as worthless, still unable to understand that Vernon's bequest wasn't about money. It was about character, about recognizing worth in someone everyone else had overlooked. Claire had won, not just the legal battle, but something more fundamental, the right to be seen as capable, as worthy, as someone deserving of the gift Vernon had spent 50 years building. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer where she kept Vernon's most important documents. Tomorrow she'd wake up, make breakfast, take Maya to school, go to her foundation office, and help another mother escape the kind of poverty that had almost destroyed them both. Tomorrow she'd continue building on Vernon's legacy, proving every day that his trust had been well placed. But tonight, in the quiet of a house they actually owned, with her daughter sleeping safely in the next room and a future that felt secure for the first time in 4 years, Claire let herself simply be grateful. For Vernon's patient observation, for his deliberate gift, for the combination lock that opened to her mother's birthday, for the fortune hidden behind rust that no one thought to look past, and most of all for the simple, profound gift of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood that worth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the quiet strength of someone who kept going when everything said to give up. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.